What's up, space pirates? This is your Admiral, the tantalizingly taboo Dr. Disaster. And the other day, we talked about the rumor that Sony, the publisher of Lost Soul Aside, they were pushing the developers of that game to add in all kinds of social justice crap into it. That definitely makes it sound like Sony is not the sort of publisher that I would want to work under.
If you don't mind me saying so, sounds like a real asshole.
This has really backfired on the game, unlike Black Myth Wukong and Wu Chang Fallen Feathers, the first two AAA Chinese games, but unlike those games, the Chinese audience has abandoned Lost Soul Aside due to these controversies. Whether it ends up being accurate or not, this has really caused problems with the Chinese audience who have no tolerance for politically correct nonsense. They look at that sort of thing and collectively they say,
"Get the hell out of here."
But one studio that managed to avoid any of that controversy, even with PlayStation as the publisher of the game, was Shift Up with the release of Stellar Blade. Sony did cause some major kerfuffles a few months ago when they were pushing to prevent the game's release in countries where they couldn't force people to use a PSN account to sign in on Steam, but Shift Up reportedly pushed back on that shit and made sure it did not happen. And in the end, despite PlayStation's involvement, Stellar Blade was a game that had absolutely zero traces of wokeness or political correctness in it. In fact, the game did an admirable job of stamping all over the woke crap, unapologetically showing T and A all over the screen, much to the chagrin of the HR lady sewer creatures who despise the so-called male gaze.
I think women and semen don't mix.
We knew what you think.
Well, as a result of all the success of Stellar Blade, Shift Up confirmed this past spring, right before the game launched on Steam, that they were making a sequel, and there was talk that it was possible the sequel would come out before the end of 2026. And in truth, being released before the end of 2027, that would be an insane feat, considering that the first one released in 2024. And these days, most studios are taking 5 years or longer to put their games together. But Shift Up is not like most studios. They aren't resting on their laurels. They are clearly hell-bent on building on their success. Shift Up just revealed that Stellar Blade 2 is deep in active development. Considering all the momentum right now for games that are decidedly not woke, considering the hunger for that sort of material, it is very wise that they are moving along at a breakneck pace.
What the hell was that?
Alright, me hearties, make sure that you hit the like button on this video, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, I've begun uploading content onto Rumble, so make sure to follow me over there, and don't forget to follow me over on X, where I keep a list of games lousy with wokeness pinned to the account at all times for your reference. In any event, let's look at this news that we may be getting a Stellar Blade 2 a lot sooner than you would originally have thought. Now, for full context, in order to understand just how fabulously successful this game has been, take a look at the Steam release for this game. These are the numbers for that game. It managed to hit the highest player count concurrently for a single-player PlayStation game ever on that platform, overtaking the likes of Ghost of Tsushima and God of War, which you really have to think about how this is a game, Stellar Blade, that was a brand new IP IP from a developer which few people had heard of. And if you look at the numbers on VG Analytics, you can see that Stellar Blade sold 2.2 million copies on Steam alone, which is impressive as hell for a title that had been released for over a year by the time it came out on that platform. Stellar Blade was a massive sales juggernaut. But all that aside, let's read about this confirmation that Stellar Blade is in development currently, and it may come out sooner than you would have expected. This article is from Insider Gaming. It says, Stellar Blade was one of the standout titles of 2024, emerging as a new IP with fantastic combat mechanics and an intriguing story. It also helped that the protagonist Eve was able to lure in many gamers on account of her character model being just a little bit scandalous. And I find it endlessly hilarious listening to the prudes in game journalism tiptoe around this franchise. Insider Gaming is one of the better ones when it comes to this sort of thing, but still, on the one hand, they have to concede that the game was extremely popular, so they have to address the game in positive tones. They can't talk shit about it, but on the other hand, they have to constantly let the feminists know that they don't completely approve of the character model for the game, even though that model is easily responsible for 90% or more of its success. I just find that really funny whenever I read this stuff. But anyhow, reading on, it says here, insane body model aside, Stellar Blade represented something fresh and energetic, and it offered intense boss battles, a killer soundtrack, and a lot of meat on the bones, enough to keep gamers occupied for many hours. Now, a sequel has been confirmed as being in development. In a recent financial update, ShiftUp confirmed that a sequel to 2024 Stellar Blade is in active development. It was just a few weeks after the game was released that ShiftUp announced an intention to make a sequel, but now those cogs are actively turning, and you have to think that was only a year and a few months ago that the original game came out, so think about how quick all of this turnaround is. They went from a generic idea to being in full-on development in just a little over a year. Now, this really begs the question, why can't other studios manage to do this? Why is it that Dragon Age the Veiguard, for example, took a freaking decade to make after Dragon Age Inquisition came out? Or, maybe that's not a fair comparison since that was a game that went through development hell, being bounced back and forth between a single-player RPG to some kind of live service title, but let's just look instead at a franchise like Perfect Dark, the latest iteration of that franchise, which was recently canceled, but that project had been worked on for the better part of a decade, and it still wasn't anywhere ready for release when it was canceled just a few months ago. And I don't think that this is so much a matter of skill with regards to the difference in timelines. Sure, ShiftUp seems like a very talented bunch of developers, but there are plenty of very talented people in the West as well, so no, I don't think it's that at all. I suspect that the biggest thing holding back game developers in the West is the fact that so many of these studios have been hollowed out and infiltrated by the sort of people who would be appalled if they were making a game like Stellar Blade. These are people who are in the industry to make political statements and to push their activism. For them, making games is simply a job. Meanwhile, for the people at ShiftUp, they seem to genuinely enjoy themselves when making their games. The people at the top of that company especially seem to have a true passion for making the games, which is why you saw them fight so hard to push back against Sony when that controversy was going on where it looked like Stellar Blade on Steam would not be released for many of the countries in the world. Too many studios these days are run by the sort of number crunchers and bean counters who would have let Sony get by with that sort of thing. They don't care about the product that they put out other than to know that people liked it well enough to buy it in enough of a quantity that they were able to make money on it. when the executives of a studio aren't gamers, and when the developers of a studio aren't gamers either, or at least they aren't gamers first. These are activists first that we see so much these days in the West, but under those conditions, it's no wonder that a game like the upcoming Fable under the Xbox umbrella, that game was announced half a decade ago, and it still is being pushed back further. Meanwhile, Stellar Blade looks like it's going to manage to throw out a sequel for its original in something around 3 years. As long as the game ends up being good and not a complete stinker, this is the sort of accomplishment which ought to be studied by the developers in the West. They ought to be asking themselves at these other studios, how is it that Shift Up did this, and why are we not accomplishing the same thing? I strongly expect the sequel to Stellar Blade to outsell the first and to launch this franchise into the upper echelon of elite IPs. But I'm gonna leave it there. Drop your appreciation for Shift Up and Stellar Blade into the comment section below, and we will talk there. Thanks for watching, me hearties. If you haven't already, your Admiral is inviting you to subscribe to the channel and become a part of the crew. Life as a space pirate may not be glamorous, but there's always plenty of booty.